Meccano, part number P208, from the 1933 aeroplane constructor set, with an RAF rudder fitted. Probably the best Meccano set ever. Hi folks, and welcome back. My childhood, for as long as I can remember, has included, in some form or another, Airfix model kits and toy soldiers. From my earliest memories are looking at what my brother had built and being lost in the miniature scale, to sitting at the kitchen table and gluing parts together and wanting to slop paint on long before the glue was ever dry. It was at this age the scale began to bother me. No longer did the wooden village fit the Matchbox toy cars and the Airfix toy soldiers. In fact, even the toy cars were out of scale to each other. Slowly, my interests in the art of play were changing, and with it, I think I lost some of my imagination. I guess I started to grow up. It was also the era of the Saturday afternoon matinee movie on the TV, of which we only had 3 channels. So take it or leave it, that was your choice. I got to watch war movies where German panzer tanks, well, to be honest, either M26 Pershings or M47 Pattons, battled against heroes trying to blow up the bridge, etc. And these battles were played out across my bedroom floor, only to find out that plastic model kits don't fare up at all that well to the rough play of an under 10-year-old. In the end, most of my models ended up being more glue than plastic. But with model kits, I also got to read history, as each model would have a little bio on what it was you were building. And it was somewhat of a shock to me to realise that the plucky Brits didn't always have the best kit. And the more I read, the more I realised that what I was being fed on the silver screen was in fact propaganda. And maybe there were 2 sides to everything. Before I explore the history of the light tank, I thought it might be an idea to talk about the AFV, or Armoured Fighting Vehicle. We tend to think of it as being a 20th century thing, but in fact it's much older, as in several thousand years old. The first AFV dates back around 5,000 years, with a 4-wheeled Mesopotamian war wagon. In turn, this led to the faster and lighter chariot, which ruled supreme for nearly 1,500 years, until it was outclassed and defeated on the battlefield. The Mesopotamians were using a hybrid animal called a kungas. The kungas was the stale offspring from the successful mating of a Syrian wild ass and a female domestic donkey. They were used long before domesticated horses and seem to be the first bioengineered hybrid animal in history. After the decline of the heavy war chariot, sometime around 500 BCE, Celtic tribes would still go on to use light chariots in Europe against the Romans and each other. Then, for several hundred years, the armoured knight on horseback ruled supreme. Nothing could beat English heavy cavalry until the invention of the gun. During this period, the AFV's role was that of assisting in breaching of fortifications. In this role, we see both the armoured battering ram and siege tower. In the early 15th century, a series of civil wars happened in Bohemia, the Hussite Wars, as they were also known, saw a number of modern advances in how the battlefield would look. Amongst these, for the first time in medieval history, we see the modernisation of an army, not just a feudal levy, but that of a call to arms for all citizens, along with military training and state-of-the-art equipment being carried as personal arms. We also see the first use of words that in time will be used everywhere by armed forces, like the Hofnetzer or howitzer, and the Pistella, which will become the pistol. But maybe the greatest shock to the Catholic Crusaders who attacked the Protestant hussars was the Vuzavar Haruduba, or war wagon. The hussars took standard wagons and refitted them with thick wooden walls and emplaced cannons with a wooden armoured shield to face the enemy. This method of wagon wall providing fire at the enemy worked well. That and an ability to move the wagon to a new firing position, needing the enemy to reset their guns. Not an easy task at that point in history. This allowed the hussars to defend their fledgling nation. It wouldn't be until the 19th century that we see the marriage of the internal combustion engine and weapons to create the first mechanised AFVs that we would begin to recognise. Post-World War I, the role of the tank changed. No longer would we use it as a breaching weapon to break an enemy line, fortified by trenches and defended by heavy artillery. The role of the tank was to act as the armoured fist for a fast-moving mechanised force. In 1927, the British Army began a series of exercises to work out how tanks, infantry, artillery and air power could work together, in a new tactical theory called combined arms. The experimental force was formed in 1927 under the command of Brigadier Robert Collins. He was one of Britain's earliest supporters of armoured mechanised warfare, possibly influenced by F.R. Sims' invention of the Motor Scout and Motor War Car, which I discussed in the first of these builds, the Armoured Scout Car, which was to have seen action in the Second Boer War, which Collins served in. The role of the EMF was also to help Britain to design and develop a new breed of tank. The heavy tank was to be armed with an anti-tank gun, the medium armed with a 3-pounder and machine guns, and the Vickers light tank to be armed with a 50 cal Vickers machine gun and a coaxial 303 Vickers Mark II. The force would also include Birch guns, Britain's first workable attempt at self-propelled artillery. The Birch gun would only serve with the EMF from 1927 till 1931, when due to politics the gun was dropped, because after all, horses have been used to take our guns into combat for the last 200 years. Somewhere down the line, the experimental work was ignored, and with hindsight, it's easy to look at it and just shake our heads in disbelief. The politics at the time insisted that tanks should only advance at infantry speed and be attached in smaller numbers to assist in breakthroughs. The cavalry insisted that there was still a role for the horse in modern warfare, even though the First World War had proven this theory wrong. The Locarno Treaties of 1925, the first incarnation of a mutual defence pact between Britain, France, Belgium and Germany, was compromised by the lack of understanding of how warfare was changing. Britain in the 1920s was leading the world in tank design, but we lost sight of the ball, insisted on the old way was the best way, that cavalry would win through. And by the 1930s, Germany, who had watched the exercises and read deeply of Brigadier Collins' tactics and thoughts, were to begin to lead the world with a new concept of blitzkrieg. The USSR was also starting on their tactic of deep operations, where through combined force, armoured units would strike deep into the enemy lines and just keep on going. The Americans would later take these two tactics and create the Thunder Run, where mechanised troops would strike deep into the heart of Baghdad. I think this is a great model. I am really loving these builds. Their playability as a child would have been immense. And in this build, unlike the anti-aircraft gun, I managed to get the gun to operate correctly. And I'm left with ideas of what I can build with some thought and planning, because tank design at the time was that of mainly flat plates. So in theory at least, it should be possible to design and build a Panther tank or a Tiger Mark 1. And that is the role of Meccano. It is there to want to inspire the mind, make you want to learn more and build something. And maybe my enjoyment of these models is the warlike, destructive inner child that's still in me. After all, I still get a lot of enjoyment out of gluing bits of plastic together and slopping paint on. But during my research, I came across a short story by H.G. Wells written in 1903 called The Land Ironclads, printed in the Strand magazine. It's not one of his better stories, in my opinion. The Land Ironclad is an AFV of between 80 to 100 feet in length, using the dip-lock ped-rail wheel system, and carried a squad of 20 riflemen, officers and engineers. In the story, the battle is set between countrymen and townsmen. The countrymen are armed traditionally, relying on cavalry and horse-drawn artillery. They are supremely fit and confident, whereas the townsmen are more scrawny and rely instead on technology to assist them. It is the townsmen that have created the land ironclads, and who in the end proved to be victorious. The story was met with mixed reviews, with many claiming it was just a rehash of his 1898 novel, The War of the Worlds. But it helped to cement Wills as a prophet of the future, when within 15 years the world would be seeing land ironclads fighting in France for real. But without a doubt, the tank from its first invention and debut in battle through to its latest form has changed the face of warfare like no other inventions, apart from the aeroplane. That Britain failed to learn from the EMF of the late 1920s and early 1930s, and that tank design failed to keep up with changing technology and tactics, cost us deeply in 1939, is, in my opinion, without a doubt. The light tank is all but gone now, its role passed on to other technologies, such as drones and APCs. But still, this was rather a fun build.